Hello everybody, and welcome back to Nerdy Miniatures. And in today's video, we return to the evil side of our Rohirrim army as we build the Lord of the West March, Freca. In today's video, watch as we build and paint the figure. This video will be broken up into different phases, building and then painting, and these will be indicated by the timestamps, so feel free to jump around as you wish. Anyway, enough rambling, let's not stall any longer and get on with the build. So, to start this mini, we of course had to build him. Like Helm in last week's video, Freca came separately from the Battle of Edora's starter set. This guy is made of resin, so we used our Gorilla Glue to stick him together, and honestly, it took no time at all to piece him together. Now, moving on to the painting stage. Just like Helm, I primed Freca using grey sear spray paint and left it to dry for 15 minutes before painting. I only applied one coat of this. Unlike Helm, Freca's clothing consists of a lot of dark colours, like browns, blacks and greys, so it is important to add highlights where I could. To begin, I hit all the areas of the figure that would show Freca's skin, like his face, neck and hands. I used Guilliman flesh to do this. I did a light wash of colour all over and left it to dry. I then moved on to the brown parts of Freca's boots. For this I used Steel Legion Drab, a cool toned sandy brown colour. There are straps that wrap around Freca's legs. I added these later, but I wanted to make sure I didn't lose this colour. Moving on to Freca's body. Breaking up the body is a light coloured tunic. For this I used Nuln oil all over the tunic and let it sink into the crevices before letting it dry down. Whilst this happened, I moved on to Freca's lower part of his tunic and his cape. For this I used 3 coats of Bassacanum Grey. You can definitely switch this for a base paint to avoid having to do so many layers, but I enjoyed how buildable this was and I felt I had more control of the outcome this way. Now moving on to the furs that cover Freca's shoulders. For this I used Abaddon Black. I used this colour a lot during this build. I did 2 coats of this to really make sure I got into all the nooks and crannies. Moving on to Freca's hair. I didn't want his hair to just blend into his furs, so I decided to mix two colours together on a palette in the end. For this, I used a small amount of Air Abaddon Black and Gore Grunter Fur to give his hair a dark brown, almost black effect. Moving back onto Freca's body, and specifically his armour. I again used a small brush and Abaddon Black to cover this in a thin layer. I also used this time to paint the black straps onto his boots. Once dry, it was finally time to add my first layer of highlights. To do this, I used the technique of dry brushing. I used a thicker, slightly denser brush. I used the colour Grey Sear. I took only a small amount of the paint on the brush and brushed off as much excess as I could onto a piece of paper towel. Once the brush was almost dry, I then began to brush the paint across the figure slowly, revealing the details hidden underneath. Now it was time to start adding the gold elements to the armour. For this, I used Retributor Armour and a thin brush. With the dry brushed highlights underneath, this really amplified the colour and made it look even bolder against the dark mini. I also used this same paint to outline the brooch on his shoulder and the buckles that went across his chest and on the cuffs of his wrists. Now it's time to add highlights to the skin and to colour the eyes. For the eyes, I used Vallejo Model Colour in white. I added small highlights to the tunic, as well as the whites of his eyes. For his skin, I used Kislev Flesh and Cadian Flesh Tone to add warmth and depth back into Freca's skin, and to make him look less fair. Now it was time to move on to the finishing touches, such as filling in his brooch, adding black to the eyes, and creating Freca's blue markings that went across his forehead and cheeks. For the eyes, once again I used Abaddon Black, and I ended up using a safety pin to create the small black dots. I'm certain this can be done with a brush, but I was struggling to balance my brush and control the amount of paint I had in order to create the eyes I wanted. They are far from perfect, but at least he has eyes. For his brooch that had been outlined previously with Retributor Armour, I used the colour Lead Belcher and Metallic Silver to highlight the spirals. Moving on to his tattoos. For his tattoos, I used the smallest brush I own and base Cantor Blue. I followed a picture on my laptop for reference and tried my best to follow the general pattern of the markings that Freca had in the film. This is Freca's figure complete. Now it was time to move on to his base. For this, I used fake grass in different varieties. Originally, I went in with a bright green and a more yellow fake grass, but upon looking at it again the following day, I realised that this was just too bright and went instead with a more realistic dying grass colour. For paint, I used the technical paint Stirland Mud, as well as Skeleton Horde and Mournfang Brown, to add more depth to the base. I built this up in layers around the grass and left it to dry. And that is it. That is Freca all finished. Let me know what you guys think of him in the comments down below. And if you have any suggestions on what I could do differently, such as techniques for his eyes, or a technique I should try to help these future figures look even better, then let me know. So what is coming next? The next video coming out on the channel will be none other than the Bride of Death herself, Hera. So if that interests you, then subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. That brings us to the end of the video. If you managed to stay to the end, thank you for sticking around, it is appreciated. And if you enjoyed this build, then might I suggest subscribing to the channel so you can see how it performs in battle. Down in the description below, you will find a link to Mr. Nerd's channel, so if you enjoy MMOs and action RPGs, then please feel free to check that out. There's also a link in the description to my channel, where I cover all things fantasy lore, from Tolkien, Game of Thrones, and most recently Age of Sigmar and The Witcher. So if that piques your interest, there is a link to that also. Anyway, that'll be it from me today. Hope you guys have a wonderful day or night, wherever you are in the world. And as always, peace out.